So this is a very quite chill event. So we discuss about period poverty in higher education, or any like shame or like you have experienced when you are brought up. And so it's like very chill and open discussion about period poverty in the spirit of International Women's Day. So let's get it started.
Should we start off by just introducing ourselves?
I'm Poppy. I'm a second year PhD student here at Bristol Uni. I'm based at the medical school. My research looks at factors which influence how people manage menstrual health symptoms, including things like education and inequalities. I've been working with women's health for the last 5 years, since my interest was piqued during my master's degree. And it's kind of, from the piece of research I did then, it's just opened a can of worms and led to where I am today.
So my name's Lambert, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Pachamama project, which is basically a charity growing a network of volunteers all around the world to make reusable sanitary pads like these, which we then distribute to refugees and vulnerable people who experience period poverty. I'm going to give you the pack to pass around and have a good look at them, check them around. They've never been used, I promise. Here you go. So I was a student at Bristol when I started the project back in 2020 during the first lockdown, and since then we've grown this incredible network of nearly 3,000 volunteers in 14 countries making these pads. They've made over 160,000 now. We've got them coming out our ears, and we've been able to support over 20,000 people out of period poverty. They last 5 years, so once someone has a pack, they're really sorted for the foreseeable future, and I'm sure we'll talk more about why that's so important later in the discussion.
I'm Linlu. I'm now the current Equality, Liberation and Access Officer at Bristol SU. So I'm very interested in this project because from the background that I was brought up, it's still like shame and stigma around the women's period, and it's considered as dirty or unlucky. So that's one of my priorities. Want to push the university to provide free period product on campus, because I think it's not only help to remove the stigma, and also it's like really important for students because it's kind of a necessity for half of the population. So that's why I'm here, and I will pass it to you.
I'm Adishree. I am a student here, but also I'm the founder of Pleasantri, which is working with different corporates to bring sanitary napkins in schools and universities, and we currently have 3,000 that are coming out hopefully next week. Before we sort of have a discussion around periods and period poverty, I think it's important to define what period poverty means to us based on our experiences and sort of like our area of work. So does anyone sort of
From the definition, the academic in the room.
I wasn't going to give an academic.
okay, come on.
But with my experience, I think there's kind of two key aspects. The first being access to materials and facilities that people need to manage menstruation, and the second is access to information, which is so important and underlooked. Education, and found that even in UK schools, quite recently, people come away lacking really basic knowledge and feel quite unprepared at times, and as a consequence of that, have challenges managing their menstrual health. So for me, it's about those two things.
Amazing and so true. The definition of period poverty, I suppose, would be the inability to access sanitary products or education or private spaces in order to manage your period, or even wash facilities in order to manage your period. And what that really means is that short term you have people using scraps of material, leaves, whatever they can get their hands on to manage their periods, getting infections, experiencing discomfort, experiencing the shame of leaking through your clothes when you're out and about. And long term, as you just said, you have massive impact on education. So you have girls missing out on school every single month, you have women missing work, and you have real long-term consequences on gender equality and on poverty cycles. And what it means on like a very human level is that you have people finding themselves in a bomb shelter, leaking through their clothes and having to deal with that with no privacy, because who thinks of, when you have to run in the middle of the night and grab a bag with whatever you can get your hands on, who thinks to pack period products? You've got people in refugee camps, for example, who are living in tents in horrendous conditions, have been for the last 14 odd years, for example, the situation in Lebanon with people from Syria, and you have people living in camps not being able to leave their tent for like 5 to 10 days every single month because they've got their period and they don't have products. And so when you give someone a pack of pads or you sort out this issue for people, you're not just providing products, you're actually allowing people to just get on with their day and not have to think about their period so much, because it shouldn't be another challenge in what is already a very difficult experience that a lot of people that we support are facing.
I think, just to add on to that, in India, for example, 23% of girls drop out when they hit puberty, and I think that's a very important point you brought up about, both of you, about, you miss out on education, and down the line you're not getting the same job opportunities,
Based on our discussion beforehand, I kind of want to know, what's your opinion around period poverty, and have you ever experienced some kind of form of period poverty in any case, or have you seen any cases? It's just a basic, open discussion.
Very personal question. I have been very lucky and not ever been in a position where I couldn't afford products, but I do know what it's like to miss out on school because of my period. I do know what it's like to have to miss out on important opportunities because I suffered with horrendous period pain growing up, and I know that's something that you've done a lot of research on. I'm sure you will talk about more, but and that is one of the reasons why I started the Pachamama project. I saw all these people missing out on these really important opportunities and not getting the same education as their brothers, for example, because they have a period, and I thought, well, if we can get this very simple solution to people, hopefully they won't have to experience that any longer. I think people think of period poverty as something that happens in faraway lands where there's emergency situations and where people are living in extreme poverty, but it's 1 in 5 girls in the UK that have struggled to access sanitary products. So it could be your next door neighbour, it's likely to be someone that you know. So it's something to think about as well.
So I've never directly been affected by period poverty, but I did grow up in a low income household where money was tight, never to the point where I went without period products, but I do remember when my dad had to buy these things for me, feeling guilty about that because I knew that money was tight. And I think this is probably quite common for a lot of people, been caught short on occasions and not being able to find any products and had to resort to things like toilet paper, which is just, we expect toilet paper to be there, don't we, but never period products, and that shouldn't be the case.
Actually, it did happen to me when I was a teenager and caught up with no period product, and I was in a panic, and I have to ask for some other female around me, do you have any spare ones? You can lend that to me. So that's part of the reason now. I almost pack every bag I carry, I put some spare ones in a bag just in case it happened to me again. So I think it's quite really important to have accessible, very easy accessibility to this product. And also a little bit off the topic, one thing is currently, I've heard some discussion around this is, should the gym have because the gym have monthly subscription, why should we have 3 monthly subscription? Because for women, who have severe menstrual pain, they can't actually go to gym for probably a few days, probably a week in a month. So why is the case the gym are providing 3-week subscription? Because
I will say though, if you are experiencing pain to the point where you're missing out on your daily activity, including being able to exercise, that is a problem and you should be seeking medical advice. That is something that I grew up experiencing, missing school every single month because of my period. That's not something that you should have to experience. I think we grow up being taught that period pain is normal, right? And to an extent, having a few cramps and taking some paracetamol and being okay. But if you're taking painkillers and it's not touching it, you need to go to the doctors because there might be something that needs discovering.
I've luckily never been in a position where I can't afford period products, but I think we've all sort of been caught short at some point. I think my experience has been more towards the lack of discussion and lack of education. I think this is definitely something that I've discussed with other people, but growing up, you don't get taught much about periods. And when you do, it's sort of very secluded, no boys allowed. And then you're told once, and then it's done, and you never hear about it again. And I think for me that was a big part of why I wanted, well, you know, the name Pleasantri. Like, I wanted it to be something that can be talked about as openly as other. Like, if you've got a headache, you sort of go, yeah, you know, I'm not doing this today, or I'm not in the right mood because I've got a headache. But you have your period, and suddenly it's something that you can't talk about, or you think you can't talk about, but you should be able to.
And I'd say even though I spent years researching this topic, I still have that very internalized shame. I still really struggle to talk about my own periods. And I think that's something I really need to challenge, because if I'm not going to do it, who else is going to?
Yeah, I so get that. I have to do the like deep breath back up and then not hide my tampon up my sleeve, you know? It's like watching the bathroom, I'm like, no, come on, like, you talk about periods for a living, like, let's do this. Yeah, I would say the stigma as well is so important to talk about, because there are actually a lot of cases where people experiencing period poverty could access products. Like, the infrastructure is there, they could go to the school nurse and they could get products, or they could go to the local authority, or they could access the local organisations that are providing products like we do, right? But if you don't feel like you can even say the word period, and bearing in mind we're working with a lot of people who have never been taught about periods, not in school, not by their parents, it's too stigmatised, how do you even get to the point where you're accessing the product? You know, so sometimes even if you can access them, in reality, people still can't. So education has to be a massive part of the equation in order to overcome this global issue.
From my background, that's a very interesting and even a bit funny phenomenon. Like, many men actually sincerely believe that period is blue, because in advertisements they usually advise period but in a blue color to make it more like, when people see the advertisement, make them feel like more comfortable. But actually, when we think more about it, why like the color of the liquid blood red make people feel uncomfortable about it. Like, when you get injured, like when you actually accidentally like hit your knees or something, or like when you see the blood, it's not that serious. But when we think about period, and it's kind of considered as dirty or something, so it's actually something. I think education is really important, and education should be accessed by both genders to understand what it is like. And yeah, I'm so glad like we do have like other gender joining this discussion, because I think it's really important to have that open conversation and to remove that stigma around it.
I think that's a really good point in that with education, like I assume you've done more research on this, but is there a reason why boys and girls are taught it separately? Or
I think it comes down to stigma. So I published some research last year looking at young people's experiences of menstrual education, and one of the questions I asked was around this gender segregation, and I had very mixed responses from people about how they felt about it. On the one hand, people reported that it created this culture of secrecy and reinforced the stigma, but on the other hand, some girls said that when they were mixed with the boys, there was joking behaviour, there was messing around, and it impacted people's learning and sense of like safety and sharing and stuff. So I think it's there are challenges, especially for teachers who are under-resourced, don't get the training and support they really need to teach this. But I think, yeah, absolutely, everyone needs to be included. It needs to be inclusive of boys and also gender diverse students. But I think the context is also important, and I think in some situations having a separate safe space for girls could be necessary.
do you think it's an age thing maybe? Well, I actually don't know which way would be more joking, but do you think potentially there's a way around it in sort of like different ages approaching it differently?
I think it's about delivering that education from a really early age, because then we normalise the topic before any of that kind of like embarrassment comes with it, which causes the joking behaviour, I think, ultimately. So if we normalise it, introduce it at a young age, then I think we can help to overcome some of those issues.
I think that men and boys absolutely have to be taught about menstrual health and education in order to understand the women and women and girls in their life, not just because it's good for women more generally, but also because it's good for men. Like, we think about periods as affecting women, right? But periods are an essential life process which we need for human life to happen. And if you're suddenly in a situation where you've got a single father with, you know, daughters, and the father can't talk to the girls about periods, you've got a major situation going on, both for the father and for the daughters, right? So even just on that level. And in terms of ages, I think that we have to look at it across the board. Like, for example, we're looking at, even in the NGO space, the WASH sector, so the water and sanitation sector, is generally run by men. And so even if we don't talk to men about periods, then they're not going to prioritise, you know, any aid towards period poverty, because it's not even something that will come into their like hemisphere. It's not even necessarily like that they're trying to like put women in a box. If you don't think about it because you don't experience it, why would you? So even on that level, and then also, you know, we do menstrual health education with everybody that receives our pads. But if you do a load of menstrual health education with a load of women and you send them on their way, by the way guys, now you can talk about periods. It's not scary, it's not taboo, go ahead and spread the word. They go and do that, they go back home, they go back to their fathers, brothers, sons, and what happens, the stigma is reinforced, because if you don't involve the men and the boys in the conversation, then you can never actually get over the stigma community-wide. So it's really, really important, both on an institutional level, but also within communities, to really tackle the stigma for everyone. And then exactly what you were saying, you know, if you find, you know, trans men having periods and they're not in the room because they're not in the rooms where we're talking about periods, and that's a real problem for them as well. So it's really important that we have inclusive education, and that doesn't mean that it can't be gender segregated. Sometimes that is necessary, and you need to have safe spaces for people to talk about things openly. And like, a lot of our education takes place in gender segregated spaces just because of that reason. But that still means it needs to be there for everyone, right?
I'm looking at the question list. So there are often debates between providing free products as a short-term solution versus having self-sustaining models. Where do you stand on this, and what do you think the best path would look like?
I think we need both. I think disposable products are popular for a reason. There is a convenience factor in a lot of situations. But they're also popular because we haven't had the awareness about the alternatives until quite recently. And we know that the environmental impacts of disposable products are significant. But for me, I think it's ultimately about people being able to make an informed choice. And so equipping people with the information about the variety of products, all the pros and cons, and providing people with like packs of different things to try in schools would be amazing. Because otherwise people might just not get that opportunity. I think what happens quite often, I know it did for me, is that you know, I looked at what other people were using around me, what I saw was normal, and quickly became very loyal to the products that I was using. And so when I came across sustainable products, I was very apprehensive about trying them. So it's about raising awareness about what the options are, but also being judgment-free and supporting people to make the right decisions for their bodies.
I would say that there's no one-size-fits-all for the solution to period poverty. So unfortunately, we could give our reusable pads to everybody in the world, and they wouldn't work for everyone, because there are people in emergency situations, for example, that don't have access to water infrastructure or private spaces, that just can't use them. And we know that. But we know that for the people that they do work for, they work for at least 5 years. And so just that alone is extremely beneficial, because it means that the people that it does work for can stay in school for the next 5 years. And, you know, that sees them through the end of their secondary education. It keeps them in work. It sorts this problem out fully for people. And then we just know that we have to work with other organisations to get disposable products to people in emergency situations. So for example, we've done that in Gaza most recently. We also did that in Ukraine at the beginning of the war and the surrounding countries. So we supplied disposable pads to people in the refugee camps in Poland and Moldova and Romania who were fleeing Ukraine. And we try and work with our partner. We've got a partner called Pads for Refugees, and they do disposable products, and we try and go with each other everywhere we go so that we can always provide that option for people. Like what you were just saying, I think it's so important to give people the dignity of choice and do the awareness and explain, you know, the benefits of using reusable products, but ultimately it's their choice. I'm not going to force anyone to use any sort of period product. It's just the solution is there if it works for people.
To be completely honest, like it was not until recent years did I realize there's actually like self-sustainable period product like the milk cup or like some panties. So yeah, I think education and providing that knowledge of there's actually alternative ones existing in the world is really important.
I don't have anything to add to that, to be honest.
I will say, so just like one thing that I just thought of, we survey everyone that receives our pads, or at least 20% of all beneficiaries, and we've recently found that there's been a real shift in terms of preference. And so, for example, we distribute in Pakistan, and we've seen actually the schoolgirls that we support there, they actually now prefer reusable pads than they do disposable pads since having the mental health education. And that's because they've got something they can rely on now. They don't have to be going to NGOs or their school every single month and being like, do you have products this month? Instead, they have something that they can rely on. And we've had the same response in Uganda and the schools that we work there. And so I think there is this shift that happens once you start building the awareness and once people start understanding the benefits of having a product which lasts for a long time rather than, you know, just a one-off thing. And sorry, just very quickly as well, there's also an issue with waste disposal in a lot of places. So in a lot of places you find that people are having to like burn pads, for example, which are made up of up to 90% plastic. So it's really terrible for the environment, really terrible for your health. And so even just on an environmental level and a practical level, sometimes reusable products are so much more helpful for people in general.
Okay, in your world, have you come across any particular smoking examples of how periods and period poverty affect students, and what changes, big or small, would make the biggest difference in ensuring menstrual equality in schools and universities?
I think from an education perspective, one of the most striking impacts I saw in my research was people who, either because of their education or because of their parents or their friends, what they learned or what they thought was normal symptoms were actually very debilitating. They were really difficult periods in school and social life, only to years later find out that they've got conditions like endometriosis and adenomyosis. They had the knowledge much earlier on, knowing what a normal period looks like and what an abnormal period looks like, and when to seek that medical attention. They could have got treatment so much earlier and not had to endure years of suffering. So I think that's the biggest impact.
Yeah, actually one of our key focuses, we have two key focuses in terms of our work, and that's refugee community and most school in Uganda. This actually is a fantastic story. This teacher saw our work in an article and contacted, basically saying that he'd realised that the girls weren't coming into school every single month because they couldn't come in when they were on their period, right? And so he put his hand in his pocket and he bought all the girls in the school reusable products and basically solved the problem for all these kids. And then suddenly in the local community, like all these other schools got wind and were like, hang on a minute, we want them too. And he was like, I just can't afford, like on my school teacher salary, I can't afford to buy everyone in the world pads, can you help us? Anyway, we did a trial and it has been such an incredible response. 98% of students have reported improved attendance simply from having the reusable pads. And so we know that it is a massive solution for people. You've got 1 in 4 girls missing school every single month in Uganda because of period poverty, and so we know that you get these products to people and that's no longer an issue. And so that would be the biggest thing that I've seen in my work.
There are people who can't afford period pads, so they resort to the cheap and some factories they make period pads like piece by piece. So there are people who can't afford regular made period pads which sell in the supermarket. They resort to the factory manufactured ones, and they can only afford that piece by piece, and they wash their pads and to reuse that, which is not healthy. It's there are some serious sanitary issue around that. So unfortunately, I just feel like that thing is actually probably the first time that go viral on the social media where I came from. So I think that's this turning point when people in my country realize there are people in extreme poverty and they can't afford that. So yeah, I'm from China. Yeah, so I think it's really important to firstly have that knowledge and to remove that stigma. So that's why I would like to keep talking about period and period poverty. Yeah, that's the first step to, when you keep talking about it, it kind of remove the stigma and get more people to talk about it. And the second thing is about education part and spread that knowledge, spread that like sustainable alternatives which can save people's money. So yeah.
Yeah, I think in sort of the research that I've done so far, I've been fortunate enough not to see like terrible examples of period poverty, but when I was doing research just for the University of Bristol's experience, I found that though a lot of bathrooms have bins that say, you know, like these like free items, or they're usually empty, and when I started researching, there was just so many complaints of students being like, you know, we've been caught out, we rely on caught out, or they just can't afford them, but they rely on what's in those bathrooms, and they're just not there anymore. So for example, in the Richmond building, at least in the Innovation Centre, we used to have them constantly in those bins, but I don't know if it's just me, I've not seen them around for the last month. For the last month or 2 months, I would say, it's been empty, and it's quite, like, it's frustrating because especially when you expect them there, and then they've gone, you're sort of like, oh well, I'm sort of relying on that one. But yeah, I would say, because getting caught out is, obviously it's not directly period poverty, but it's that same lack of access, and bringing it back to what you said earlier about, you expect toilet paper everywhere. So, you know, equally natural body reaction, like, what's the difference other than half the world doesn't do it?
And they say if men have periods, their products would be free, and you can't really argue it when you see the toilet rolls everywhere, right?
A quick question though, when you see all these free products that are in the bathrooms and things like that, do you think there's a bit of like a backhanded agenda almost of, trying to make it almost inaccessible so they don't take more than necessary? Because you mentioning that, I know there is a box on the 3rd floor, but it moves around from like the cubicle, and sometimes usually it's in like the accessibility bathroom, and sometimes I wonder, like, is it almost like purposefully hard to find that, like, they're trying to save money in a way? Do you think that kind of plays a big factor into it?
I like to assume goodwill. I wouldn't jump to that conclusion, maybe that is the case and I've got it wrong. I think as a society we don't prioritise menstrual health. Often, like when I talked about the wash sector, for example, the water and sanitation sector in the NGO sector, I don't think that they're not prioritising menstrual health because they hate women and they don't want women to have period products. I think that they don't think about it, right? So it's up to us to make people aware, and for us to write to the university. Like, I didn't know this, I'll be writing to the university about this. Like, it's important, like, make them aware. I doubt it's intentional, I might be wrong, but I like to assume goodwill.
Misguided almost, where it's like, because obviously it costs money and it's part of the budget that comes out, and I'm very for it, but my curiosity comes with, like, I don't really know, to be honest. It's just a question I had, where if it could be intentional, or it's like more, again, as you said, it's not that they're aware or something like that.
So with that one, I know in the University of Bristol actually, it's not a centralised budget, so it's not like the university says this is how much we've got for sanitary napkins. We're currently working to try and get the university to do that, but currently it's up to the school themselves. So for example, in our innovation building, it's up to the innovation building if they want to provide them or not, and it's within their own allocated budget for that year or for that month or whatever. But I think from your question, I think it's not ill-willed, but I do think there is a part of them that goes, we've done our job if they're there, and they've not gone to think like, you know, it should be in every, although I do remember it being in every bathroom initially, so I think it's something they've recently taken out of bathrooms, which makes it feel more intentional, but I don't think it's ill-willed as much as it is inconsiderate.
It is very inconsistent though. Even though I work in a medical school where you think maybe there might have been some more thought into it, I can only think of one bathroom where there are period products provided in the whole building. So yeah, a central policy I think is absolutely crucial.
Yeah. I think even in like the engineering buildings, they have a space for them and they are always empty, without a fail. I think we've written a blog on our website about this because every time I went, they were empty. And so at some point I just took a picture because I was just so frustrated. But even on like you know those Facebook blogs where it's those anonymous confessions or whatever they're called, there are so many complaints. Like, I found it crazy because I thought it was just like people like talking about other people on that. But when I like dived into it, there were so many complaints about period products specifically in the University of Bristol. And I was like, if people are going anonymous to try and gain some sort of like recognition towards the issue, I think that's where the university really has to sort of listen. The university did predict, I think it would cost £34,000, to provide sanitary napkins in every toilet in the university.
I'd like to know what their budget is for toilet roll though.
And equally, 34,000. I can find the exact number later.
I think you have a question over here.
No, I was just going to say with the whole bins and the toilets, in the Arts and Social Sciences Library, they just have a poster saying, oh, if you need to have access to sanitary pads, come to reception and ask. But at that point, if you've gone to the toilet and you've like taken your pants down, you see blood, you don't then want to put them back on and walk over to the reception leaking everywhere being like, oh hey, can I get some sanitary, like I feel they need to be there. And there's a lot of toilets through at university that say, oh, if you need access, ask at reception. But by that point it's already too late. If you get up and go somewhere, you're going to get soiled. So I think that's another thing that maybe the university aren't fully aware of, is the whole logistics behind when you need them, you need them next to you when you're on the toilet, not finding out and then going to get them and then coming back, you know?
I think that's a good point in terms of like a lot of the bins that provided, they're next to the sinks. And once again, you know, you're not going to walk out with like your underwear around your ankles to try and go get a pad. Like, I think they do need to be in the same way bins to dispose them, they put in every single cubicle because they know you don't want to be walking out with them. But unused ones you should be bringing in with you.
I think I have a bit more background knowledge around the Arts and Social Science Library, because the product over there is run by the Arts and Social Science Library themselves, so it's also run on a donation basis. So that's why I guess they put the pads over the reception instead of putting at each toilet. So I think really the central funding from the university will be really crucial to address this problem.
What do you think of the distribution, how effective the distribution is in terms of, it says only take if you need it, how do you define who needs it?
I always think it's really interesting when I see that, or sometimes you get quite passive aggressive messages which are that aren't quite as nice as only take it if you need it. And I always think, okay, the odd person might hoard a load of tampons, but I mean, in the same way that someone might hoard a load of toilet roll, it's not a reason not to provide toilet roll, right? The fact that one person might steal a load. So I don't think that should be a reason why people shouldn't provide it. And I think there's no particular harm in saying take what you need. You maybe do that if you had free food on the table for people so that everyone gets access, right? But yeah, I don't assume ill will of people, so yeah.
I think when you said some people would hoard it, I don't necessarily even think that's a bad thing, because okay, obviously you want everyone to be able to access it, but at the end of the day, if someone is hoarding something like tampons or sanitary napkins, I don't think they're doing that out of some malicious intent to make sure no one else has them. I think they're doing that because they need them at home and they don't have them at home. And I think in terms of your question about whether it's a good distribution method, I think having them there is a good way, because it's sort of, well, how else would you give them to people?
Centres give out contraception. Do you think that something similar for period products would be effective?
I think it could be, but I think we would still need them in the bathrooms just in case someone's gotten caught out, or also because as much as like we want to remove stigma, I think sometimes it is so internalized that you don't want to go to someone and be like, hey, I'm on my period, or hey, I can't afford period products. And while that's something we want to work towards, almost the shorter term solution is to be like, if you're not comfortable asking, just take it.
I think also you've got to look at who's responsible, right? So if you look at a university, the university responsible for menstrual health, yeah, okay, put them in all the bathrooms, but if it's a government, for example, what are you going to do? Like, is the government going to send products to every bathroom in the UK? Probably not. And so in that case, I think probably it is sensible to have products available in certain health centres or authorities or libraries or whatever it may be, in the way that you have in Scotland, for example, where products are free for everyone, and that's written into law. It's been the first country to ever do that. So I think it will depend on which institution is responsible. Can I ask a question to the audience? I know that I'm going to put you on the spot, so don't feel like you have to answer, but there are some guys in the audience, and I just wonder what your menstrual health education was like. Did you get any? Were you in the same room as the girls? Like, I would love to know.
I came from an underfunded state school, so I think just in general puberty and all of that information was not taught about. It was one class, we were separated, and that's what I remember. I think it was year 8.
I came from Iran, and they teach you like as much as just how the menstrual cycle works, and that's about it, and not much, to be honest.
What age did you learn how the menstrual cycle works at? Was it GCSEs, or was it like as part of
Way
sex
earlier.
ed? Okay.
So I would say probably like 10, 11.
And do you think it would have been beneficial for you to have better menstrual health education? Do you think it would have?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if they thought that boys that age don't need to learn it at that age, or they'll come to learn it later on in life. But that wasn't something that was touched on when I was in school back in Iran. So maybe they taught it to girls at that age. I wouldn't know, because the schools aren't mixed. So I had no idea of knowing. So.
Do you think the way that you feel about menstruation has changed as you've gotten older? Like, you guys obviously feel fairly comfortable talking to us right now. I know this is a safe space where we've been talking about periods for the last hour. But do you feel like, I don't know, 5-10 years ago you would have been able to talk about periods? Do you think something's changed? Or maybe your menstrual health education was good enough to get to this point for you guys?
I think it was good enough, but I think it's definitely made me more considerate. I think so, especially because some of my friends are girls, and then I feel like there's certain things that you pick up, and then you understand that, and you become more considerate around them during those times as well.
Okay, sorry, I took over and ran a focus group for like a couple minutes.
Yeah.
I think we can like just do Q&A, because I think we sort of flown into that anyway. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
So around the bins and the toilets, I was wondering, is the university collecting any data around that? So like how many people are using it, the rate that it empties and stuff?
Yeah, it's currently the university has run a 3-month free period trial. So it started this January and by the end of this month, so there will be some data collected from that trial. So I can also learn from the university how much did they cost to run this 3-month trial, and so currently they've done this trial in only 5 toilets. So that might give us an estimation about how much would it cost to run the whole year and in much more toilets. So I think the stats will come out at the end of this month. Yeah, I'm also like really excited to find out the stats.
Can I ask what sort of products are being provided, and has sustainability been considered?
Currently it's now all tampons and pads, so there's no other sustainable alternative choices. Yeah.
Actually, this is just sort of because of your question. You know your question earlier about the centres. Do you think it would be maybe worthwhile having disposable products in toilets, but in centres having reusable, primarily reusable, because that's obviously when it's not an emergency use case, as just like a distribution.
Yeah, on that, I'm just bit concerned about because if we have like sustainable choices in a like gender neutral area, that will become as a first come first served mode. So I'm just a bit concerned about that mode, whether that's helpful, like beneficiary for all the people and all the demographic. Yeah, so I guess for now, I would say it's more an easier way for the university to provide the disposable options. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, like, from each of your respective positions and what you guys do, what do you guys think, in your opinion, is the solution you need most? So, like, you have to talk about the problems and stuff. What would be like the most important thing to tackle first, and why?
For me, I think it comes down to education. I think if we've got the information that we need from a young age and those conversations are normalised, then I think that will go a long way to solving a lot of these issues.
I can't give you a simple answer because I don't think it is one thing, and I think every community is really different, and every community's needs is really different. You know, you could look at the UK, for example, and I would very much agree that education has got to be the primary focus. But if you look at Gaza, for example, in terms of tackling period poverty, do I think that education is the primary focus? No, I think people need products. You know, so I think it's got to be very different depending on the situation you're looking at. And even in terms of the type of products, I really don't think that you can just give everybody the same thing, because it can so depend on people's living situation and cultural stigma and taboos and everything in between.
In regarding to education, at what age would you think is the best age to introduce period, and at what level of period would you talk with this age group?
That's a really good question, and I think I need to go and think about it more. It's not something that I'm aware of much research has gone into, but it definitely should be. I know that there's a lot of debate around that at the moment. I think last year the government were proposing a revision to the sexual and reproductive health curriculum. That was motivated, unfortunately, by transphobia, issues like that. But as part of that, they were suggesting introducing, outlining what ages people should be taught certain topics, but from a perspective of we're going to ban it from being taught below this age. And one of the topics was menstrual health, and they said it should be banned from either year 3 or 4 below that age, which I think is a massive misstep, especially because people are starting periods at younger and younger ages. And if that was something that came to fruition, it would mean that for people who are starting before that limit, the teacher wouldn't be in a position to support them. So I'm quite concerned about where this like right-wing agenda could be taking us. I think that's something we really need to be cautious about. So I haven't really answered your question, but it's a really important one.
I was going to ask, in the sense of if the curriculum does change, what would you guys want included in that curriculum? Because, for instance, like Ella, you said about if you have really bad period cramps, that's not actually normal. When, like, do you think that should be included? Or I'm just curious as to what topics you think everyone should know about.
So I mean, everyone's on a very different level of like menstrual health education, right? I remember mine was like, we were taken into a corner of a dark room and the teacher slapped a sanitary pad on her arm and said, right, off you go, girls, this is how you manage your periods. So better than that would be great. I can tell you what we do. We do menstrual health education with the people that we support, and we teach about the menstrual cycle, how to manage your period. We talk about period pain, the different phases of the menstrual cycle, puberty in general. We talk about menopause as well, because there's no understanding of that, and so we do a lot of sessions with like mothers and daughters together and do a well-rounded. I think even more so than the actual curriculum, I think you spoke about like what age do you start, and it's so tricky because you don't want to overstep. You know, parents at the end of the day should have the right to tell their kids what they want to tell them in good time. But I would love it to be the case that we just talk about periods like we talk about anything else, and it's not something that we have to broach at a certain age, it's just something that is a given like anything else, because in my view, it just shouldn't be stigmatized. Like if you cut your arm and you bleed through your shirt, no one's going to jeer and laugh at you because you've got a bit of blood. They'll just get you a plaster. You know, it should be the same. If you bleed through your clothes, someone should just be like, "Oh, don't worry, I'll go get you a pad. Don't worry about it." And so, yeah, I think, I mean, yeah, of course, we need to deal with the actual curriculum as well. But even just like, let's just chat about it, and it is happening. Like, you know, over the last since we both started working. You know, since 2019 when you started, it's been massive waves. Like you no longer see ads with blue liquid, for example. That's changing. Yeah, like you hear people talking about periods on the radio and on live TV, which just wasn't happening 5-10 years ago. So it will happen, but it's just slow. And obviously, that's coming from a UK perspective, and you know we have to have a global perspective.
I think in terms of education, it's also so based on the level of knowledge and also like the person, what they do, because I happen to know someone who's a sportswoman. So actually when she reaches a certain age, like when the education she received about menstrual cycle is more like how it will affect her sports performance, and that's not something you will normally know when that kind of education at a teenage level. So I think that really depends on different levels of, yeah.
Are there product-specific stigmatizations, for example, like tampons? What are the problems around?
That's a good question, because from the background I came from, there's like stigma around, especially around tampons, because that's something you put in your genital
Vagina.
Yeah.
We're destigmatizing here, okay?
Yeah, so I think it's very tricky one, because it's also, from my culture, it's also related to women and their ability to like give birth. So, and also like a cultural thing where related to sex, like people don't necessarily have sex before marriage, which is also like, there's just different levels of kind of traditional thing, but also it's like something we want to get rid of at the, like in this society at the moment. So yeah, I think it's something I would like to see it improved in recent years.
Do you think we'll ever reach the level of Scotland where they provide free sanitary products?
There are lots of amazing activists out there who are campaigning for just this kind of issues. I know there's been a lot of work recently to try and push councils to provide free products, and some are doing it, but without that centralised incentive to do it, but it needs to keep.
Yeah, unfortunately it's dropped off the agenda. So back in 2021, I think it was, the UK announced the free period scheme. So now in every state school and college in the UK, kids can access free products. The schools can access a budget for products for their students. And obviously around the same time this scheme happened in Scotland as well. But since then, I mean, there was a peer poverty task force, for example, where organisations could come together and really push our lawmakers to work on this issue. It's no longer has been active for the last few years. And so, yeah, I mean, it's something that we need to do more. We need to push the government to put this back on the agenda. But right now, as we look at it, and you know, with the cost of living crisis and various wars happening around the world, you can see why it's not being spoken about a huge amount. But I think we need to make sure that it is still being considered, because it affects so many of us, right?
You've basically reached the end of the event, and if you got any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. And, there are some crafting at the table, so feel free to use them if you want to do some cute International Women's Day crafting. So yeah, let's come to the end of the event. And thank you very much, guys, for coming.